Okay, so again, Chodesh Tov, everyone, and we continue our study of Bereshit. I think we're done with Gan Eden, with the forbidden fruit, with the curses that were not curses, but rather a statement of our situation in the world. And we get now to the story of Cain and Abel. A dramatic story. Like the first thing after they leave Gan Eden, we read about the sibling rivalry and the first murder. So let's look at the text and see what we could find there that may be hiding. So this is Bereshit, chapter 4. והאדם ידע את חווה אשתו, and the man knew Hava, his wife, ותהר ותלד את קין, ותאמר קניתי איש את אדוני. She conceived and bore Cain, and she said, I have gotten a man with the help of Hashem. So she explains the meaning of the name. Cain is from the word kana, and have in mind that the word kana in biblical Hebrew doesn't mean, well, it does mean to purchase, but it also means to make. Koneh shamayim va'aretz is the maker of heaven and earth, and therefore the owner of heaven and earth. So we could almost say that liknot means to own, even though I said that there's no verb that parallels the word to own in Hebrew. But liknot is to own. So you own it if you make it or if you buy it. So kaniti ish et Hashem, I have manufactured or pre-made a man with Hashem. Hava is the one who comes after the expulsion from Gan Eden. Adam doesn't talk. It's Hava who speaks, and she says, "I have made a man with Hashem," and she speaks again when she has shed. Vatosef laledet et ahiv et Havel, and then she was pregnant again and gave birth to Havel. But here the Torah doesn't tell us what is the meaning of the name Havel. Just his brother Havel, as if it was natural. Everybody knew, oh, that's Havel. That, we see him, we know it's Havel. Vayi Havel ro'et son, v'Cain haya oved adama. Havel was a shepherd, and Cain was a farmer, a tiller of the ground. If Cain is a tiller of the ground, he is a direct successor of his father, because his father was told that he has to till the land, right? Beze'at apecha tochal lechem, that you have to till the land and toil working with the land. Vahi miketz yamim, verse 3, and in the process of time it came to pass, Vayave Cain miperi ha'adama min hal Adonai, Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto Hashem, Vehevel levi gam hu mibechorot zono uvechervehen, and Hevel also brought from the firstlings of his flock and from the fat thereof. Vayisha Adonai el Hevel vel minchato, Hashem paid heed, respected Hevel and his offering. Vel Cain vel minchato lo sha'a, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect, he did not accept this offering, and Cain was very upset, and his countenance fell. It showed on his face. Already here, the way the Torah organizes the text, the way the Torah presents the text, we see the tension. Because the verses should have been arranged differently. Meaning that since we are talking about two brothers, we would expect that the actions that are associated with those two brothers would appear in the same verse. So for example, so start from the beginning. Ve'adam yadat Hava ishto. Adam knew Hava's wife. End of verse. And then in one verse we should have read Vatahar vateled et Cain vatomer kaniti et Hashem. She gave birth to Cain. Vatosef laledet et ahiv et Havel. But no, they're broken. She gave birth to Cain. New sentence. She gave birth to Havel. Havel was a shepherd. Cain was a tiller. That should have been a different pasuk. But here also in verses 3 and 4 and 5 we see the lack of balance. Why? It says in verse 3, Cain brings a sacrifice. In verse 4, Havel's bring a sacrifice. Havel's sacrifice is accepted, and in verse 5, Cain's sacrifice is not accepted. To write the psukim in a balanced manner, the Torah should have said, Adam knew Havai's wife. She gave birth to Cain, she gave birth to Hevel. Then next pasuk, Hevel was a shepherd, Cain was a tiller. Next pasuk, Cain brought a sacrifice, Hevel brought a sacrifice. Next pasuk, Cain was rejected, Hevel was accepted, right? But the Torah breaks it in a way that conveys that tension already from the structure of the Pesukim. But and another point of lack of balance is that Hevel's name is not explained. But we could try to guess what is the meaning of the name Hevel. Actually, we spent so much time learning Kohelet together, we should know what Hevel is, right? Kohelet opens with Havel Havalim Amar Kohelet, Havel Havalim, Hakol Havel, which some translate as vanity of vanities, all is vanity, all is vain, or as Menachem commented, it's Hevel is Ruach, it's spirit carried in the wind. So wind, it's all wind. So Hevel is wind and Cain is possession. So that gives us a hint on what is happening here. Beyond the sibling rivalry, the Torah does tell us a story of sibling rivalry, but also a story of society and the war between different factions of society. The shepherds and the farmers. The farmers have kinyan. They own the land. They are stable. They are connected to one place, anchored in the land. Whereas the shepherds move from place to place, like the wind, with the wind. They are nomads. Who is more important? It's a war between different it's a war of classes, of professions. The shepherds versus the farmers. In the long run, in Tanakh, who are the leaders of the nation of Am Yisrael? They're all shepherds. Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Yosef and his brothers, Moshe, David, they're all shepherds. David is even being praised. I took you from behind the sheep to be a shepherd to my nation. In Psalm 23, David praises Hashem. Mizmor le David, Adonai ro'i lo ihsar. Hashem is my shepherd, I shall not want. Right? And when we think of real estate, we read in Kohelet, Melech lesadeh ne'evad. A king can be subjugated to the field. So it's interesting that the Tanakh later on will tell us that it's better to be a shepherd than to be a dweller, a farm dweller. As if to say that the earthly possessions are not as important as the spiritual possessions. The shepherd is always also perceived as someone, with the flute, in nature, connected to creation. Maybe the value or the advantage of the shepherd is in that he understands that he is transitory. He is not permanent like the farmer. He doesn't have an anchor, a place to return to. Am Yisrael receives the Torah in the desert as a nation of nomads. We're not connected to a land. When we are promised the land of Canaan, but we receive the Torah in the desert. And maybe that's the secret of our survival in diaspora for 2,000 years, because the Torah became our land. So those are all elements that are hidden here in this story. And we'll see later that, this is one of the storylines of Bereshit, that it doesn't only talk about humans or families or the beginning of time, but also of manifestations of different elements of civilization, different types of government, different professions. When we get to Lamech, we'll see Lamech has 4 children. He has Yuval, Tuval, Cain, and Naama, right? Their sister Naama. Yaval is the Avi Yoshev Oilu Mikne, is the first shepherd. Apparently after Hevel was killed, but Hevel and Yaval sound more or less the same. It also means Yaval or Yuval mean, the words mean a stream, a rivulet. Yuval is the first musician. Tuval Cain is the first blacksmith. And Naama, we don't know what she did. But there is a meaning for their names and their role in civilization, which we'll get to later. But let's go back to this text of Cain and Hevel. So, as I said, already in the beginning of the story, the Torah opens with that tension. Cain, Hevel, Cain, Hevel. They're not even. There's this friction between them. Now, why did Hashem reject Cain's offering? That is something that bothered a lot of, many commentators. Rashi comments on it, following the Midrash, that Hevel's offering was not so good. Cain's. Why? It says, "Vayave Cain mi peri ha'adama," of the fruit of the ground, of the fruit of the land. So it says mi peri ha'adama. It's whatever he has, the rotten fruits. When you go to the supermarket and they have yesterday's tomatoes underneath half price. That's what he brought as a sacrifice. But it doesn't really say it in the pasuk. Mi peri adama could be of the choices of the fruit. Hevel hevi gamhu mi bechorot sonam. Hevel also brought the firstlings of his flock and their fat. Well, the word gamhu actually connotes that he did the same. He was similar to Cain. He learned from Cain, he followed his example, and he brought the best. So Cain also probably brought the best of what he had. So I always, this midrashic interpretation bothered me. I felt that it doesn't have what we call a foothold in the pasuk. But this week I heard a hidush, and we have to say davar b'shem omro, to say in the name of the person who said it. In my I teach a course on Tanakh at the Academy for Jewish Religion in California, so online, and we were talking about sacrifices in general. So that obviously we spoke about Cain and Hevel because this is the first sacrifice. And one of the students, Jackie Rafi, she's a cantor and now is rabbinical students, said that as she was reading that text of Hevel in context with other texts that I gave on the korbanot in the early prophets, Yeshayahu, Yehezkel, Yirmiyah, Amos, and even in Tehillim chapter 50, they all rebuke the people who bring sacrifices without being transformed by them. So the whole idea of the sacrifice, just like tefillah, or tefillah like the sacrifices, is transformational. You don't bring a korban and you remain the same person. If you come to the synagogue, if you come to tefillah, and you leave the same person that you came in, maybe it was a waste of time. It has to be a tiny change. And if there's no change, it's that we're being static is actually falling back. So she said this. Cain's reaction for his sacrifice not being accepted was murder. Which means that whatever negative feelings he had before the korban did not change. That's why his korban is rejected. It was not done wholeheartedly. I think it's an amazing insight, and I can tell you, I was dumbfounded because I'm teaching Bereshit for so many years, and I always had this, certain approach to the story, and someone gave me this new angle, which is amazing. It says, look, in retrospect, if Cain was able to get up and kill his brother because of jealousy, that was brewing in him before. And that when God rejects the korban is not good enough, not because of the quality of the produce or the animals, but because of Cain's thoughts and emotions. Now, there's a different way to read the story, and that's they're all, like we say, Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 facets to the Torah, and that is even within that interpretation that something was missing from Cain's korban. Maybe God should have approached him differently. Maybe God should have received it and then say, you could do better. The moment that God rejects the korban, the sacrifice, something is broken, and Cain reacts violently. And if we read it this way, we could read it as a cautionary tale. God tells us, as parents, be careful how you give attention to your children. Because if you are too harsh with them, they might rebel, or they might harm each other. God says, I don't want your minha because it's not good for whatever reason. But then the result is that violent interaction between Cain and Abel that ends with murder. And the rabbis actually, not all the rabbis, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai mentions it in the Midrash. There's a statement in Midrash Rabbah in Bereshit on about that says this. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. After the murder, God tells Cain, Kol demei achicha tzoakim elai min ha'adama. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, קשה הדבר לאומרו, ואי אפשר לפה לפרשו. Says this is something here. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, it is difficult to say this thing, and it is not possible for the mouth to interpret. What is that difficult thing? לשני אתלטין שהיו עומדים ומתגוששים לפני המלך. 2 athletes are wrestling in front of the king. Obviously, those are the gladiators, right, in front of the emperor. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai have heard of what is happening in the Colosseum. I assume that he didn't go himself to watch it. That would not be something that a Jewish Talmid Chacham would do. It's not the same as going to the movies. Today, if a rabbi quotes something from the movies, he would say, I didn't watch it, someone told me about it, right? I have a gosh of Netflix, he watches Netflix for me and he tells me how to enjoy it. But with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I'm sure that he did not go to watch that, because that would be against all moral standards to see that kind of violence and gore in the Colosseum. But he knows what's happening there. So he says 2 athletes are wrestling in front of the king. Ilu ratza hamelech pershan. It is up to the king to separate them. The practice was in Rome that the victor puts his foot on the neck of the person who's defeated, or on his body, and looks up to the emperor, and the emperor can give him the sign. Some people say that this is thumbs up, thumbs down came from there. The others dispute it. But in any case, the emperor has the power to spare the life of the defeated athlete, right? Velo ratza lefarshan. But the king did not do that. He let the victor kill the loser. Hazak acher al havero v'harago. So he mustered his strength and he killed the defeated gladiator. והיה צווח ואמר man יבעי דיני קודם מלכה. The person who died was screaming and saying, who would bring my lawsuit or my complaint against the king? כך כל דמי אחיך צועקים אלי מן האדמה. Similarly here, the pasuk says, the blood of your brother the brother cries out to me from the ground. And the Midrash goes on to say, don't read it as to me, but rather at me. Hevel is crying at me, meaning he blames me. Now the amazing thing is that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, Kasheh davar lomo, it's hard to say. And then he reinterprets that it's not written there. what is Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai saying? He's not talking, I think, only about this particular incident. He's talking about death in general. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai has witnessed the Bar Kokhba revolt. We spoke about it this morning in a different context, but we should know that the destruction, the Bar Kokhba revolt, inform rabbinic literature tremendously, because that's what they lived through. It's like the Holocaust and the establishment of the state of Israel dominate Jewish literature in the 20th century. Those are the most cataclysmic events and amazing events, both negative and positive. So obviously those things dominated the rabbinic literature of the time. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai has also a commentary about death, violence, wars in general, but he pins it on the pasuk, telling Hashem, you could have prevented that. It's your fault. So very harsh words by Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So, but let's go to the text and see what happens here in Bereshit. So Hashem tells Cain, Lama haralach velama nafelu panecha. Why are you upset? Why art thou wroth? And why is your countenance fallen? Halo im tetiv se'et, ve'im lo tetiv lapetach hatat rovetz, ve'elecha teshukato, ve'ata timshol bo. If you do well, shall it not be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin couches at the door, and to you it's desire, but you may rule over it. Now, there are many different interpretations of this pasuk. They're all difficult. There are many difficulties with this pasuk, which I'm not going to go into all the difficulties. Some of them are that there is a condition in the beginning. If you do this, then that, and if you don't do, then that. It doesn't work well in the Hebrew. The word hatat should have been het, sin, and not hatat. What is the meaning of sin couches at the door? What is the meaning of elecha teshukatot? The desire of the sin is towards you. Ve'ata timshol bo, and you will rule it. It's a promise. It should be. It reads as a promise, but it is interpreted as a challenge. It's up to you whether you challenge it, whether you control it or not. There are many problems in the pasuk, which I'm not going to go into. I just want to offer an interpretation that is connected to what Hashem tells the woman. Remember the last time when we discussed that, right? I mentioned this interpretation of Naftali Torchiner, where he reads this pasuk this way: the teshuka means sustenance, just like with the woman. And Menachem commented to me that teshuka just does mean desire, but we discussed it and we came to the conclusion that they are related. If one depends on another for sustenance, there's a certain connection. That's what you desire. It could be actually, now that I'm thinking of it, the evolutionary biologists explain that when men search for women who could bear many children for them, because that's the interest of men, to have as many children as possible that will carry their genes that control the world. Women look for a man, from an evolutionary point of view, who could provide for their children, who will be there, who will be a faithful man and will be there for their children. So we could say that the teshukah, the need to be sustained, to be provided for, is part of the desire. So here, as I said, the problem is, if we talk about sin only, what is a desire? Can we say that the sin desires us? That's a very negative view. And abstract also. So, according to Jackie's interpretation that I mentioned before, what we could say is that God tells Cain, I know that your intention was not right. Sin couches at the door means your aggression is in you and you have to control it. But I'm going to follow the interpretation that I read in Professor Tuchiner's book. And he says this: the word hatat should be read as two words. Hita, wheat, at, you. Now, I usually don't like rereadings or rewritings of biblical texts, but in this case, it's not necessary to amend the text. It could be a subliminal message. It's a layer of understanding that remained from previous generations and was coupled with the idea of sin. So the idea of sin at the door is still there, but also the idea of the war between farmers and shepherds. And this is how we should read it. Haloim tetiv se'et. Se'et, to laset is to carry. God tells Cain this. Why are you so upset? Because Hevel is better than you? No, you're better than Hevel. Why are you better than him? Because im tetiv se'et, if your wheat will yield good crops. Ve'im lo tetiv, or if your wheat, your fields will not yield a good crop, still lepetah hita at rovetz. You crouch at the door of the granaries. You are at petah hita. You are the one who has the wealth, the food, and the abundance that Hevel needs. Because Hevel is a shepherd. He's out there in the fields. He might not find grazing fields. He has to come back to you because you have food. You have sustenance. There's actually some historians believe that the rise of the United States to power in the 19th century is a result of the Industrial Revolution and the ability to produce tremendous amounts of wheat. America became the wheat granary of the world and controlled the wealth of the world, and from there on, it moved upwards. So now the subject of the second half of the pasuk ve'elecha teshukato is Hevel. Hevel's sustenance depends on you, and therefore you control him. And now that fits into the concept of what I mentioned, the cautionary tale. This is so common, among parents who love one child more than another, and the other child comes and says, "What about me?" He says, "You're good. You don't need that. You're a good student. You'll do good anyway, right? You're stronger than him. You're smarter than him." Whatever they say, it's not good. What that child wants is attention, is a hug, a love, to feel the love of their parents. So this is where the cautionary tale kicks in. So what Hashem tells Cain is twofold. One, yes, it's about sin, controlling your anger, controlling your emotions, bringing a korban from a pure heart, and not just as a token. But also, it feeds into that historical dispute between farmers and shepherds. God says, "Don't worry, you're good. You're the farmer. You have granaries, and you couch at the door. You're the guard of the granaries. He can't take anything from you." There's if you want a famous image, that some believe that is the meaning of that image of someone who crouches at the door protecting the granaries. It's the Sphinx. According to some archaeologists, the Sphinx was protecting the wheat granaries it was the symbol of, because you want to protect your food. So the image works well within that context. But we move from that to the question of the Midrash raises a question. I'm not going to go to the text to skip back and forth. The Sphinx could have been an idol and an image that they worshipped. The Torah says, right after this conversation between God and Cain, it says, "Vayomer Cain el Abel achiv," and Cain spoke to Hevel, his brother. Vayi biotam basadeh, when they were in the field, Cain killed Hevel. So Vayomer Cain el Abel achiv. But it doesn't say what he told him. Just he spoke to him. So one way to understand it is Cain told Hevel what God told him. I'm better than you. And it led to a dispute, and it ended in murder. Another interesting explanation I heard from a colleague of mine, Rabbi Moti Ma'aravi, is that the dialogue is missing because they didn't hear each other. Cain spoke to Hevel, but Hevel didn't hear him, and Cain didn't hear Hevel. You can talk to each other, but it doesn't mean that you listen, that you hear what they say. Now, the Midrash fills in the gap. The rabbis beautify the story, they embellish the story, and in this case, in a very poignant way. They say, we missed the dialogue. I think people came to the rabbi and says, what was going on here? Do you have any transcript of what was the dialogue between Cain and Hevel? We're so curious, we want to know. And the rabbis provided three different scripts, three different texts for that conversation. According to one rabbi, Cain and Hevel were fighting over possessions. Hevel told Cain, you are wearing garments made from wool, the wool of my sheep. Give it back to me. I own it. And Cain told Hevel, you are standing on the ground which belongs to me. So either you start hovering or just disappear, right? That's according to one interpretation. Another opinion in the Midrash is that they were fighting over the future temple, the Bet HaMikdash. Each one of them said, yeah, Shai is like, what? Yeah, of course, there's no Israelites, there's no Jewish people, there's no temple, but they're fighting already thousands of years earlier whether Bet HaMikdash will be built on my territory or on your territory. So we have to understand, what are the rabbis saying there? The third opinion of the Midrash is that they were fighting about a woman. Either it was the proto-Hava, the Hava prototype that was not qualified and got discarded, or an extra sister that they had and they wanted to marry, whatever. I'm not getting into that. But so we have three opinions. They're fighting over the land, or like the possession. They're fighting over the temple. They're fighting over a woman. And this is a brilliant insight of the rabbis. What they tell us is that all wars between men, at least between men, could boil down to three things: power, religion, and desire. They're either fighting about who has more money, the land, the garments, right? Whose religion is correct, or who's the religious leader? The temple will be in my territory, and about women. So the rabbis created here a prototype of, or archetype of disputes, what people fight about. So we'll go back to the text and see what happens next. So here's the pasuk that I mentioned. Vayomer Cain and Hevel achiv, and Cain spoke unto Hevel, and it came to pass, and he killed him. Hashem speaks to Cain. He says, "Where is your brother?" He says famous words, "Lo yadati, am I my brother's keeper?" Hashomer Rachi Anochi, and that became the idiom to describe anyone who fakes innocence, who feigns innocence in after committing such a crime. And God answers, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the land. You are cursed from the ground, which opened its mouth to take the blood of your brother from you. And that's also a metaphor for covering up for murder, which we'll see again and again in Torah. So whereas Adam's curse was, you will have to work hard, you will have to toil to receive the fruit of the land, Cain is being told, even when you work hard, the earth will not provide for you. You will be a nomad. Now, if we consider the dispute between Cain and Hevel as a social thing, whose profession is more important? the shepherd or the farmer, for Cain to be told you're going to be a nomad is to be deprived of his status. You're going to be a nomad like the same Hevel that you killed. Vayomer Cain el Adonai, Gadol avoni mineso. Some read it as a statement, some read it as a question. My punishment is greater than I can bear. No, so Gadol, my sin is greater than I can bear. So the translation put the question into the text, but we should read it with a question mark. Gadol avoni mineso, is my sin too great to bear? And it's interesting that he uses the same verb nasa, that Hashem uses with when he says you're good. Aloim tetiv se'et, you yield a lot of crops, and Cain says I yielded a great punishment. It's not good. Like it's Cain is being sarcastic. Cain is attacking God, and see how he attacks, how he with what is called in Arabic chutzpah, it's ancient Arabic if you're wondering. No, I'm just kidding. What Cain tells God is this: Vayomer Cain el Hashem, Gadol avoni mineso. Really, you can't bear my. What have you done to me? Hen gerashta oti hayom me'al penei ha'adama, umipanecha esater, והייתי נע ונד בארץ, והיה כל מוציאי יהרגני. Says, you drove me away from you, from the face of the earth. I have to hide from you. I would be a nomad, and all who will find me will kill me. There's a question that we'll have to address maybe next week. Who are all these people who would find Cain? Who is the rest of humanity? But Cain adds elements. God says you will work hard and you will be a nomad. Cain says, I have no place upon the earth and I have to hide from you. Who spoke about hiding from God? So I think that what Cain does here, very audacious. He tells God, your system doesn't work. He's not the only one who said that. I remember we studied the book of Yonah. I think Yonah also said that. A lot of people tell God, your system doesn't work. So Cain tells God, "En gerashta oti hayom me'al penei ha'adama." Right? You drove me away. You kicked me out. Who else was kicked out? His father. Cain tells Hashem, you expelled my father, and now you expel me. Now, it's not true. Hashem did not expel Cain. He says, Na vanati abaret. You can be wherever you want, but you won't have one place. Cain, there's no defined place from which Cain is being kicked out. But Cain reinterprets it in order to associate his punishment with his father's punishment. Umipanecha esater, I have to hide from you. God didn't tell him to hide from Hashem. But who did hide from Hashem? Adam. After the sin, vayitchabe Adam veishto mipnei Hashem Elohim betoch hatzagan. They were hiding in the. So Cain tells God, look, hey, listen, I see a pattern here. You created my father. He had to hide from you, and you kicked him out. And now I have to hide from you, and you kick me out. That means that your system is flawed. It's the same. There's a bug in the program, right, as in the software. And God sort of accepts it and say, okay, Lachen kol horeg Cain shivatayim yukam. Whoever kills you I will revenge your death sevenfold. And he sends him away. And we'll see later on that this is a storyline in Bereshit that shows us the deterioration of mankind from one sin to another, and the fact that Cain was let go without a punishment brought to the injustice of Lemech and the generation of the flood. But we'll stop here for today.